Hello, I'm Wendy. Today we're painting Snowdrops in watercolour. It's an easy tutorial using only two colours. I have a very simple drawing here of snowdrops that are not quite open. It's an easy drawing to do. You can do your own. If you want to, you can download my drawing to copy or to get inspiration from. There's a link below in the description box. I have masked out the flowers with masking fluid, but a little later on in the video I'll show you a quick demonstration of how to put the washes on behind the snowdrops without masking them out. I'd wet all the area above the snowdrops with clean water, but I just did some downward strokes below as I wanted to leave some areas of untouched white paper. The next stage of the painting is to drop in the colours of the background. I'm just using two. I'm using raw sienna and ultramarine. They're making greens where they mix on the paper, but I also have a darker green mixed already on the palette. I wanted to use a subdued bluey green for this painting, rather than the bright greens that you would get if you used a colder blue, such as Prussian. Once you've decided on your composition, and maybe use the two colours here if you like them, then I suggest you experiment with some other colours as well. Keep it simple, just use 2 or 3. For this picture I started out using the raw sienna, and then I dropped in the ultramarine around the flowers. All the time everything was staying very wet. If you find the paint is drying out, use some clean water on a brush and damp an area, or you can use a little spray bottle as well to keep everything wet. I'm progressively adding a stronger colour as I'm putting the washes in. You want to get, if you can, some darks around the snowdrops, or particularly the central ones, so that they'll stand out very light against a darker background. I suggested the stems below the snowdrop flowers themselves by just using again some downward strokes of a brush. Try to do some quite spontaneous strokes here so you get sort of a loose impressionistic effect of the snowdrops and the stems. I just softened the edges a little bit in places, popped a little bit more blue in there, a few more dark tones, and try not to fiddle too much at this point. I sprinkled a very small amount of salt into the wet paint at this stage to add a little bit of texture and suggest maybe a little bit of frost in the air. The paint was dry or almost dry at this time, and I added some upward strokes here to suggest the stems and the leaves. Trying for spontaneity, which I sometimes found a bit difficult with a video camera perched above me, but here goes. I'm varying the width and the tone of the strokes. You could always change brushes in order to do this. And then at the very end I used a rigger to do a little bit of splattering work on here. I'm not sure it was really necessary. Again, it does suggest a bit of spontaneity in the painting. As I promised earlier, I'm going to do a quick demonstration now on how to put the background washes onto this picture without using masking fluid. I know some people don't like using masking fluid. I quite like it myself, and I find it quite easy to use. It's just a question of getting the right masking fluid and using the best brushes that you can. I do have several videos where I do explain how to use this, so you could go back and have a look at that. If you really don't like using the masking fluid, you find it a bit inhibiting, maybe it slows down your painting, then you can clearly work without it. What I'm doing here is I'm wetting around my drawing, as you can see. I'm using quite a pointy brush because these flowers are quite small and there's a lot of sort of negative spaces between them that need filling. And this particular brush is working quite well. I'll put you a link to it in the description box. I can't quite remember what it is at the moment, but it is a very useful brush. It comes to a nice point. And I'm working this in exactly the same way as I worked the one that was masked out. What I mean by that is I've wet the area behind it very carefully, and now I'm dropping in the colour. You can't be as quick. You have to take your time here because you're painting around each individual flower. I think it would be a good idea if you're working like this to wet the background a little bit more than you would if you're using the masking fluid, because it is going to be drying out at a faster pace, obviously, because you're working more slowly. The colours I'm using for this little demonstration here are indigo and mainly a lemon yellow. I think I dropped a tiny bit of raw sienna in there, but they're the two colours that I'm using, and again they're mixing into greens on the paper, and I've also got a darker green mix there to put around the flowers. Indigo is a really lovely, interesting colour. It's a little bit difficult to use because, well, I find it a very cold colour. So be a little bit wary when you're using it for mixing greens. I think you want to add, as I've done here, some of the lemon yellow to it to warm it up. It mixes very well with the earth colours, with your burnt umbers and burnt siennas to give you some lovely landscape colours. And also you can get some really nice stormy skies by using it with Payne's grey and maybe a little bit of cobalt blue. So I've speeded the demonstration up here. As you can see, I'm progressively adding more of the cobalt blue, more of the darks into the centre, so the white snowdrops are going to contrast nicely against the background. And a little bit more salt in there than I did on the previous one, I think. And again, the spontaneous, hopefully, work in the bottom of the stems and the leaves went in a little bit more wet into wet than the other one. This was the finished painting when the paint had totally dried and the pencil marks had been rubbed out. I'll show you how I tackled painting the flowers using the first demonstration that I did with the masking fluid. When the paint had completely dried on this first demonstration, I rubbed out the masking fluid. As ever, there was always a few corrections to make. I used the Dr. P.H. Martin's Pen White, link below, to do the corrections on this, but you could use a white gouache or even a little bit of white acrylic if you wanted. I didn't have a lot of corrections to do this time because I was particularly careful putting the masking fluid on. Just one or two places irritated me that I just wanted to change the shapes a little bit. Even on the other one that I did without the masking fluid, when I just painted around the flowers, I still had to do some corrections on that. So the next stage was painting the flowers, and I started off by painting the little bit on top of the flower, which I learned is called the ovary, with raw sienna. And then I dropped a little bit of a darker green mixed with the raw sienna mixed with the ultramarine, just on one side, dragged it across a little bit, did a little bit of modelling just to suggest a little bit of form. I'm going to speed this up a little bit as it gets quite repetitive. So while doing this, I managed to make, as you can see, some rather bad blue blobs on the right hand side of the picture, which I didn't really want there. So what I'll do is in a minute I'll show you, give you some tips on how to remove these sorts of mistakes that you make. As soon as you can, get some clean water and a stiff brush and sort of work away at the paint as I'm doing, like this. Don't dab it out with a tissue too soon, because what's happening is that paint's dissolving in the water, and I found it better just to keep on putting clean water on there and getting rid of the paint. As you can see on the left hand side, that's coming out quite nicely, and that was the time when I just used the tissue to blob it out. The other ones on the right hand side, those bits of paint were more difficult to get out, and I didn't fully achieve it. I think if I'd used a smaller bristle brush, then it would probably have worked a little bit better, but that area wasn't in the painting, so I didn't persevere with that. The background in this picture was not terribly dark, it's a mid-tone background. I didn't want to make the shadows too dark because I didn't want to lose the white. I wanted the white to contrast with the mid-tone background. So very, very dilute ultramarine here. And then, as you can see just here, a little bit of negative painting to suggest that that flower is behind the one in front. So you've got a darker tone on the one behind. Little bit of modelling, but very, very little. I tended to do a sort of line to separate the petals and then to wash it away with water to get some nice soft edges going on there. So just here, this bigger flower is in front of the one, of that little one behind there. So I'm doing a little bit of dark on this very small flower, just to show that it's behind that one in front. This little bit of overlap adds interest and a little bit of depth to the painting, which is what you want. In those areas, it's quite critical where you put the shadow because you're distinguishing between the flowers, which one is in front and which one is behind. But on the single flowers, don't worry too much, just suggest a little bit of shadow on them. After putting a mount around it, I felt this picture was shaping up quite nicely. It does make a difference, doesn't it, when you put mounts around them. So now it was time to paint the stems. I did this very carefully with a very small brush and the dark green. I'd already penciled in the stems before I started painting. I found this a bit easier. I don't think you need to show every part of each stem. You can have some lost and found lines in your picture. I'm going to speed the next bit of the demonstration up because again it is a bit repetitive. So this was the final picture. I think painting the stems was the trickiest part of it. Anyway, I hope it inspired you to paint your own snowdrop painting. And as always, if you like the video, you can give me a thumbs up. And if you don't want to miss any of my future videos, then you can press the subscribe button. Bye for now.